Don't wait until the weather turns to replace your windows. This month, Window Nation is offering 50%. You heard me right, half off on all window styles. And their installation crews finish the job in a day or less, so you can get your new windows, then enjoy the rest of the summer safe in the knowledge that they've been expected again and again to keep your home comfortable year round. But y'all, this sale ends very soon. Schedule a fast, free estimate now with Window Nation. Call 866-90-NATION or head to windownation.com. Today on CityCast Chicago, we have seen headline after headline about budget crisis in the city of Chicago, Chicago public schools and public transit, which got us wondering, how the hell are all of Chicago's public institutions so broke? It's Monday, August 18th. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago is talking about. Before we get into it, I need to ask you a quick favor, and if you've been listening for the last week or so, you already know what I'm going to say. We'd love if you could please take our listener survey. It's at citycast.fm/survey. If this is your first episode in the last couple of weeks, let me catch you up. We've almost got enough responses that I can stop interrupting the show. So if you haven't taken it yet, this helps us learn more about the people who are listening, who are reading, how we can serve you all better, how we can make you feel more connected to the city. And remember, even if you took it last year or the year before, we'd appreciate it if you go and take it again. We timed it. It's only going to take you 7 minutes. And we entered you in for a chance to win a $250 Visa gift card. And so go ahead and take the survey at citycast.fm/survey. All right, now let's get into these books. Dr. Justin Marlowe is a University of Chicago professor and the director of the Center for Municipal Finance. Justin, welcome to CityCast Chicago.
Hey, it's good. Great to see you.
It feels like we've always been talking about some financial crisis that Chicago is dealing with. But I want to start with a very simple question. Is it weird for all of our public institutions, transportation, public schools, the city budget at large, to be going through this kind of massive existential financial crisis all at the same time?
I wouldn't say it's weird. There have been elements of this in Chicago public finance for a long time. I think it is amped up a little bit right now. The size of the crises, the size of the budget deficits that the different local governments are facing is larger than usual. This sort of cyclical ebb and flow that we've seen for a long time is nothing new, but it is a little extreme in this particular moment.
Mm-hmm. So sometimes when we talk budgets, it can feel like we're talking accounting tricks, because at the end of the day, CPS, the city, the state, they're going to put forward and ultimately pass balanced budgets, but it often feels like, again, that those were achieved through some short-term solutions, nothing that really solves our systemic budget crisis. How pressing is the problem really at this moment, and how likely are people to feel the consequences if we aren't able to make some long-term inroads here?
Yeah, it's definitely, I think, more pressing now than it's been. And you really hit it on the head. I think the thing that all of the different local governments in Chicagoland share, and by all those local governments, we mean the city, the county, CPS, the CTA, and you might even throw in parks and other local governments in that as well. What they all have in common is they all have what we would call a structural deficit, right? Meaning that the long term, their revenues will not equal the spending that they have projected. And that's not unique to Chicago. That's not unique to local governments in this region, but it is more pronounced, in this particular region for a bunch of different reasons. Pensions, certainly something you hear a lot about, big long-term debt obligations, questions about the relationship between the city and the state, CPS and the state. Those intergovernmental relationships are really important. So all of that, I think, contributes to what turns out to be a real pressing crisis at the moment. All of those local governments can get through a few $100 million worth of budget deficits without people actually feeling it per se. You can get through that with some cuts and efficiencies and maybe some small hikes on certain taxes or fees. And that's important, but that's not something that necessarily everybody feels in a very real way. The city is facing $1 billion plus deficit. It seems really unlikely that we'll be able to get through that without things that people will notice, whether it's increases in property taxes, increases in fees. In the case of the CTA, increasing, fares, which is something they haven't done for a long time, to say nothing for the potential for cuts in services, which obviously people will feel. So I think, given the size of the challenges that all these local governments are facing right now, it seems hard to believe that regular people won't feel it in ways that maybe they haven't in the past several years worth of budget crises that we've experienced.
We'll get at some of the unique but also some of the general challenges that each of these institutions face. But something you talk about is this structural deficit, right? These are problems that Mayor Brandon Johnson inherited, the current CPS interim chief, the current interim lead at CTA. And we could argue that their predecessor, a few mayors have had this buck passed to them, and a few leaders across these institutions. How far back does this go? When would you last say Chicago wasn't facing a structural deficit, that we could say we were economically in a healthy place, in a productive place?
Yeah, it's a long time. It's several mayors. I mean, you could argue that it's maybe 30, 40 years, depending on how you want to do the math. And a lot of that, I mean, it's really interesting when this comes up because there's two big components to that. One is certainly the pension stuff that we hear a lot about. And in some sense, you almost have to hold harmless leaders at that time for making the decisions that they made about pensions back in the late 70s and early 1980s. At that time, increasing pension benefits was something that would, number one, you wouldn't really feel the cost of it in the near term. But at the same time, people are living a lot longer. When people retire from public service, they're on their pension much longer than they were in the past. There have been some major demographic and other changes that have made those benefits way more expensive than anyone ever imagined. The other part of it that I think we need to keep in mind is that Chicagoland was built for a much larger population than we have now. The infrastructure is designed to serve many more people. The levels of service that people have come to expect are still much more in line with that much larger population that we had 30, 40 years ago. And so it's those two things. I think the pension benefits, which kind of came up during a very different era, and Chicago's gradual depopulation over time, and the fact that we haven't necessarily adjusted to that, is really kind of the origin of the crisis that we face now. And it goes back a long ways.
That's a very good point. When you first said 30, 40 years, my immediate reaction is sort of that Kevin Hart, damn, because that's my entire lifetime. But for so many Chicagoans, they were voters during that time. They have very vivid memories of a Chicago maybe prior to some of these large structural deficits. And it's also interesting because we talk about population loss so much on the show that it's almost hard to picture that so many of our maybe city financial woes could be better off if we had another 100, 200,000 people living in the city. What are some of the core factors that are affecting everybody right now when we think about CTA, CPS, parks, city government, Cook County?
So the first and probably most important is that all of these local governments are sharing the same tax base. And that's particularly relevant for the property tax and the sales tax. They all depend to varying degrees on property tax and sales tax. As property values are increasing, there's more real estate being sold. You see increases in property values, and the sales tax reflects the economy just more generally. If people feel good about where the economy is headed, they're spending more money on big ticket items, washer and dryer and expensive jewelry and all those sorts of things that generate a lot of sales tax. And so all of that tide tends to go in the same direction, up and down. And that affects everybody in roughly the same way. Right now, I think it's fair to say that everybody seems to feel that we're on the brink of a recession, or maybe we're already in one, depending on which economists you talk to. And that is now being reflected in the projections that we're seeing for all of these local governments. Second is the intergovernmental relationships, the relationships between the state and these local governments, and increasingly between the state and the federal government, which then flows down into local governments because, particularly when you think about something like Medicaid, that's going to change the way the state makes its budget, which is going to put more pressure on local governments. More generally, everybody's looking at those broader trends in those intergovernmental relationships, looking ahead and saying, this is going to put more pressure on all of these local governments' budgets. So it's that combination of, sort of they're all drawing from the same economic base. They all have these same intergovernmental relationships that's putting pressure on all of these local governments in similar ways at the same time.
I mean, obviously, we've covered the Trump's massive cuts at the federal level, how that has the state sort of fighting for more money. And then when, transit and CPS are looking at the state to provide billions in funding, the sort of butt gets kicked up to say we don't have the money either. What are some of the unique circumstances that make these agencies different from one another in their challenges? You talk about how they pull from the tax base in different ways. I'm thinking particularly around maybe how they utilize their COVID relief funding. It's something that many of these different local governing bodies receive, but they may have all used it in different ways to shore up their budgets.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really good place to start in talking about the differences. In Chicago, it's interesting. We have, in many ways, several different case studies of what to do and what not to do with a big infusion of federal money that way. Many hold up what the city did as sort of some good and some bad. They used it to prop up some services that needed to be provided for pandemic relief and to prop up small businesses and to prevent layoffs in city government and so forth. They also used it to stand up some new programs that they're now having to decide whether they want to continue to fund those programs. Cook County, in many ways, has been held up as the model for what to do. They were very prudent, very modest in the way that they spent those dollars. They saved some of them. They paid down some debt. They were able to do a lot of public health things that the county needed done, but not go overboard with spending, such that they would need to scale it back when we saw the reduction and ultimately the end of the federal money. So the county did some interesting things. CPS, many would argue, was sort of more on the end of using those dollars in ways that have created more headaches for CPS now, since that they've spent a lot of money on personnel, propping up staff and so forth. And now the question is, again, how much of that do we want to continue to do now that the federal money is gone? So there's also some important differences in the way that those intergovernmental relationships work. In the case of CPS, they really depend on the state for, depending on the numbers, somewhere between a quarter and a third of their budget. Some of that is very formula driven. There's not a lot of sort of discretion in how that's done. But as we're seeing with some of the recent rhetoric from CPS, the way that they measure the amount that the state owes CPS and the way that you recognize certain revenues or don't recognize certain revenues can have a big impact on how much money flows from the state to CPS. So that's very different from the city's relationship with the state when it comes to some of the shared revenues that the city uses, and very different from the way that the CTA interacts with the state, which tends to be, again, a very kind of formula-driven redistribution of sales tax dollars, for example. We'll see some differences, I think, in the way that these different local governments respond to these budget crises based on what kinds of working relationships they have with the state. And of course, the federal government is an important piece of all of this too. The city has a good number of federal government grants and things like Head Start and other programs that the city does that have a lot of federal money tied up in them. They're going to have to make some tough decisions about how much of that they want to continue to do if the federal government rolls back the way it looks like it is. All public schools have exposure to federal money through different Title IX, different types of funding that the federal government makes available.
I'd love to talk a little bit about the differences in some of our local institutions' debt obligations. There have been so many stories that at times can get complicated because it feels like you said, Cook County was a good example of what they did with their COVID money. The city of Chicago, they were split. Springfield and Illinois credit rating going up, Chicago credit rating going down, the pension obligations through all of them. Like, if you had to sort of rank based on their current debt obligations, who's in the worst situation, how would you go about laying that out?
I think an important point to make at the outset is that it's fair to say that the people who actually do the debt management at the city, at the county, at CPS are all, in my opinion at least, doing a really effective job. They have an incredibly difficult task to try to take these legacy obligations that everybody has inherited. It takes a lot of creativity, takes a lot of really technical, complex types of solutions, some of which are, I think, fairly criticized for being maybe too complex or not sufficiently transparent or very expensive in some cases. A lot of dollars flowing to lawyers and accountants and bankers and that sort of thing. But that, in some sense, is just kind of a necessary thing given the problem that all of the leaders of these institutions have inherited. Cook County, once again, could arguably is in the best position. It's improved its credit rating. It has set aside quite a bit in reserves. It has a pretty prudent investment program for all of the capital investments that it wants to do. And for the most part, it is, I think, in reasonably good shape when it comes to how it's used debt and how it will use debt in the future. Again, the county is very vulnerable on some of this Medicaid stuff, so we're going to have to watch that very closely. CPS is at the other end of that continuum. CPS has used debt in a variety of ways to try to shore up its pension funds. It does a lot of short-term borrowing just to make payroll. Some of that's necessary because the state dollars and the property tax dollars come in at very irregular intervals. It'd be like if you had to run your family budget on 2 paychecks a year. That's kind of tough to do. And so you end up having to have a lot of short-term borrowing and bridge loans and those sorts of things. But that gets expensive, and it can make it difficult to sort of know how much it actually costs to run the CPS. And that's been a problem and a source of criticism for the way that it's managed its debt portfolio. Now they're talking about borrowing again. And what's been interesting with the way that they're talking about borrowing now is that there's no connection, it seems, between borrowing and what borrowing is supposed to be for, which is investing in buildings, roads, capital facilities. CPS current leadership is talking about borrowing mostly as a way to close a budget gap and get into the next budget year. And that's something that it's concerning. And the ratings agencies and others are going to have a lot to say about that because it's not what debt is supposed to be used for. And if you're not careful, that will just create more problems down the road. The city is a little bit of both. They have a variety of challenges, both near term and long term. But I think for the most part, they're pretty restricted in what they can do with debt management. As it stands right now, the important thing to keep in mind, we complain a lot about property taxes in Chicago. Something like 75% of our property taxes go directly to pensions, and roughly the remaining 25% goes to debt service. So there's a lot of that is kind of on autopilot.
All right, so I want to name a couple qualities. I want you to think if they apply to you, and just maybe I might got your next career move. Ready? I bet. Do you have a passion for people? You're excited to help others and you got great customer service skills. Do you crave flexibility, right? You want to be in charge of your own schedule and chart your own course. Do you got that hustle in you, right? Are you ready to turn that drive into something meaningful? All right, if you answer yes, then hey, real estate might be your next big move. Realtors help people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives, buying or selling a home, and no 2 days are the same. It's a chance to grow a business, make an impact, and build the lifestyle you're working towards. Visit realtorsrealestateschool.com to set up a free career consultation. Remember that amazing little cafe you went to last summer? The one with the perfect breakfast sandwich and them delicious smoothies? Or what about that hiking spot or that biking trail your friend told you about, but for some reason you can't remember the name? Well, with Overlook Maps, special places never get lost again, my friends. Create personal lists of places you've been and want to go. Hey, share your favorite hidden gems with friends and family. Let them discover that nail salon, that barbecue spot, that row of thrift shops that you've been trying to gatekeep. Or hey, if you want, keep your secret spots completely private. But what about this? Maybe you planning a trip with friends. You can create a share list where everyone can add their ideas. Maybe you visiting a new city. You can check out lists from locals who already know the best spots that you should pull up on. And here's a key part. No ads cluttering your list. No one selling your data to advertisers. Just your personal collection of amazing places organized exactly how you want them. Overlook Maps. Collect, organize, and share the places that matter to you. Download free at overlookmaps.com. And you want a little bonus? Go to overlookmaps.com/Chicago to see some of our lists and great spots on a map and in your pocket. Your places, your way. What are some solutions here, short-term and long-term, as we look across the institutions?
The main thing that comes to mind is governance, right? And this is something that I know you all talk a lot about, the ratings agencies talk a lot about, the Civic Federation and the other organizations that keep tabs on this stuff talk a lot about governance. It's a really, really important piece of this. Having political conflict in the region is not a problem in and of itself. We expect there to be conflicts between the mayor and the city council, the mayor and the CPS superintendent, the governor and the mayor, the governor and the president. Like these are features, not bugs, of the way that we make budgets in this region. But what's rare is to have all of that conflict happening at the same time. Pretty uncommon that you would have all of these different fights happening simultaneously. And that has already kind of set the stage in some sense for it to make these budget conflicts within these different local governments even more difficult than they'll need to be. You're already seeing the city council dismiss out of hand a lot of ideas that the mayor is putting on the table for how to close that budget gap. You're already seeing the mayor say that the city council is being uncooperative, much the same way that they feel the city council has been uncooperative for the last two budget cycles. Certainly the CPS and the mayor's frictions, and to say nothing for the federal government making things much more difficult for everybody involved. So all of that conflict happening at one time is unique, and that is a problem. So my own view is that one potential solution to that is that somebody needs to come in and play the mediator, kind of play the peacemaker. In the past, certainly that's been Tony Preckwinkle. Certainly the governor could play an important role in this. The governor seems to be focused on other things at the moment. But it's going to take, I think, at some level, that kind of political leadership to say we really need to be a lot more collaborative than we're being at the moment. Number two is there's a lot of this is already underway. I think there really does need to be a close look at the spending side for all of these local governments. Certainly the mayor's budget task force, as we understand it, is looking very carefully at lots of efficiencies in spending. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit there on everything from paying for IT systems to how we do different types of procurement to staffing overtime levels, all of that stuff. Like there's some real dollars to be saved by doing that. And the same is true at the county, at CPS, at the CTA.
That feels like a line we've heard more often in recent budget seasons is like, we're going to do some hiring freezes or knock some open positions off the books. We're going to, streamline operations in the office. Do these ultimately lead to real savings, or are these just sort of annual budget over budget tricks to close the gap? Because it feels like if we're constantly talking about inefficiencies in government, whether it's hiring or IT year over year, it's like, eventually shouldn't that be solved? Shouldn't you get to an adequate staffing level or have new updated services, or, once those positions are closed or won't be backfilled, that you kind of move forward? It feels like a pot we keep dipping in, at least rhetorically.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely correct, and that's a fair criticism. We have to keep a couple things in mind. In all of these local governments, at least half of this total spending is on personnel, most of which is covered by collective bargaining agreements. So you don't have a lot of degrees of freedom in thinking about making those types of spending cuts. So a lot of people will say, for that reason alone, focusing on the spending side is kind of a fool's errand, because you're not going to be able to do much with the most expensive items, and that's fair. Same with the capital budget. Like we got to fix roads, we've got to fill potholes. There's certain things we have to do that you really can't scale back. So when you start to get into these efficiencies, depending on the government, it's, I don't know, between maybe 10 to 20% of your total spending could be reduced in some way, or you could find ways to think differently about how you do business and realize some savings in a relatively small part of the budget. But that's important for two reasons that I think go beyond just the dollars saved. Number one is, it goes back to what we were saying before, being willing to talk about efficiencies raises bigger questions about how many people do we need? How large a police force do we need? How large how many firefighters do we need? How many teachers do we need? How many staffers do we need at the CPS? And I think most everybody who works in these local governments would admit that we haven't really answered those questions. We really have not gotten to, given that we have a much smaller population today, what size government do we really need? It's a difficult question to answer. It's politically fraught. You get why people don't do it. But asking the questions about efficiencies naturally then leads to the bigger questions about how much government do we need, and what do we really want our local governments to do?
Given we've been dealing with this structural deficit going on, 4 or 5 decades, in your thought, have we done enough in terms of creative revenue ideas? Like, obviously we had different mayors sell off infrastructure or close down schools, or we've tried progressive tax at the state level that had failed to come through from voters. Like, do you think our local governments have done enough in generating new ideas to bring money into the city, regardless of population size?
Yeah, I think the short answer is there's no shortage of creative thinking about what could be done. The political will to do it is the hard part, of course. But again, to set the stage, I think it's really important to look at a couple of things that people sometimes overlook. Number one, the city of Chicago is unique in that it has an incredibly diversified portfolio of revenues. We don't depend on any one revenue source for more than between 10 to 15% of our total revenues. And that's a real benefit. That creates a lot of stability. It makes revenues much more predictable. It means that if one part of the economy is growing, but another part is struggling, you don't see massive shifts in your revenue collections from year to year, which is not the case in a lot of other places that depend very heavily on the sales tax or depend very heavily on property taxes. The downside to that is what we're living with right now, which is that if you see spending increases due to a variety of new pressures, due to inflation, due to new collective bargaining agreements, due to the need to spend on infrastructure, when spending pressures increase, it's very difficult to push a single button or pull a single lever and get the revenue increase that you need. And that's the part that everybody is struggling with right now. And every mayor that has tried, including this mayor in the last couple of budget cycles, you make a lot of enemies very quickly when you try to do a bunch of nickel and diming across a bunch of revenue streams.
I was going to say, on a very personal level, I think we can understand this. My paycheck is relatively stable from week over week, but my spending from month over month is extremely volatile. It does not always keep up. Some months are better than others, but the ways, like you say, it's hard to find a new check every month or new revenue every month to make up for that. And so some of that, I do have to take that responsibility on my own to regulate the spending.
Absolutely, yeah. What is the side hustle that can fix that? And that's really what the city is looking for. And I think to a degree too, CPS and others are facing that same dilemma. So I think that's where it stands right now. There's plenty of candidates. The mayor has talked about bringing back some version of Bring Chicago Home, bringing back the commuter head tax, some version of payments in lieu of taxes, asking the nonprofits and educational institutions to share more. None of those are going to really move the needle. None of those is going to be the thing that you can say, okay, that's how we're going to generate an additional $1 billion a year in revenue or something like that. It's going to be some combination of all of those things. But at the same time, I think that's one of the challenges, that the rhetoric around this seems to focus on, let's find the revenue source that's going to fix this for us. And the simple answer, just from a public finance perspective, is that no single revenue source is going to fix this.
And we can't really gig economy our way out of this.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there is a role for revenue. And I do think we're going to see a property tax increase. I do think we're going to be paying more to ride the CTA. I think that there's going to be some revenue piece to this, but there's no single thing you can do that's going to fix this from a revenue perspective, even though I know a lot of progressives especially would really like to focus most or all of the attention on that. It's just not the way that our revenue structures work in Chicagoland.
Mayor Johnson recently said Chicago finances are past the point of return. We know what regional transit has said, that we are at sort of that break glass in case of emergency. The things are about to go off the rails. You've been looking at this year over year for some time. How soon do you think that this is going to impact regular Chicagoans?
Yeah, I think what's different about the budget crises we're seeing across the region right now is that we will feel it in a way that we have not felt the last couple of budget crises. Certainly this time next year, if not 6 months or 9 months from now, you'll start to feel day to day some of those impacts again, whether it's service cuts, whether it's a property tax increase, whether it's increasing all of the different charges and fees that the city has in its portfolio. And the same, with the CTA. Cook County, again, is in a slightly better position, but certainly if you're in the Medicaid eligible population in Cook County, there's going to be more than likely some very noticeable changes in the very near future. So I think this one is different. We've been spoiled in some sense that we've had these budget crises that our leaders have been able to deal with through ways that have largely not affected people, broadly speaking, day to day. But this one is different. This one's going to require a different solution that people are going to feel.
A term that's been used in transit is a death spiral, right? Transit gets worse, more people leave, more of your fare box is gone. Services get worse, more people leave. In recent years, particularly around CPS, there have been some growing enrollment, though it's largely been around, young people with special needs or ESL learners, which also brings in more costs for CPS. There have been talk of Illinois and Chicago's population loss slowing. Is this the type of financial crisis point that could sort of, in many ways, re-kick off or speed up that sort of death spiral where the city starts to see these service cuts and higher taxation, more people leave, and again, we look up in 10, 15 years and this problem is built upon itself?
Yeah, there's definitely a world where that happens. And they're kind of some of the sharpest critics of certainly the mayor and the CPS leadership and others have made exactly that point. My own view is maybe a little more optimistic than that. I actually think that the Chicagoland region has a lot going for it. When you talk to business leaders, especially, they say, what are they looking for? They're looking for a really solid workforce. They're looking for reliable energy. They're looking for access to clean water. They're looking for a great transportation network. They're looking for all the things that Chicago has. And they're willing to, perhaps to a degree, overlook some of the tax burden. They're willing to overlook this sort of pensions and all the legacy costs that cause so much consternation, if they feel that the governance is in place, if they feel that decisions are going to be made with an eye toward what's going to be best for the long-term future. And that's really, again, the issue right now. When you talk to business leaders, you talk to others, and they say, the issue here is that one day the mayor's finance director says that a property tax increase is likely, and then the next day the mayor says, no, we're not going to be increasing property taxes. It's that kind of what many perceive as instability as the thing that could really create a problem for the region long term.
One day the CPS chief says they're not going to take on a $175 million pension payment. They get fired. They bring in an interim who you think will take it on just for them to go, actually, I don't think I'm going to do it either. I don't think we're going to take it on either.
Exactly. Yeah. It really is sort of who's really in charge. It's very visible. People see it. They react to it. That's the thing that needs to get sorted out. And I think if it does, then a lot of these longer term problems actually work their way through. People say, what's the most important thing that you could do to try to address the pension challenge? The answer is simple, and that's grow the economy. That's continue to create jobs, bring new taxpayers in. But to do that means making good decisions. And it's really hard to make good decisions when you face the kind of pressures that we're facing in the moment.
We have a very long, difficult, challenging financial future in front of us, but it also sounds like we need to get out of our way.
I think that's a great way to put it.
I really appreciate you. Dr. Justin Marlowe is a University of Chicago professor and the director for the Center for Municipal Finance. We appreciate you making time for CityCast Chicago.
Thank you.
Some good news. I just want to give a shout out to my softball teammates over at The Beat. We won our first playoff game last Monday, and thanks to a very late rain delay, we lived to play another day, and tonight we facing off against CHGO, who is the number 2 seed in the league. And win or loss, it has been a great season, y'all. I appreciate y'all welcoming me to the team. We playing tonight at Mozart Park at 7 o'clock. Win or lose, I am going to be back here bright and early tomorrow. I'm going to talk to you then. Peace.